How important is having 64-bit programs on 64-bit OS? I recently upgraded to 64-bit OS Windows 7 from my old 32-bit version. I noticed that while several applications are available in 64-bit, for example DC Client, Tortoise SVN, Graphics Driver, many are still 32-bit applications, for example Firefox, Adobe Reader. So, how important is it to have 64-bit applications, performance-wise? I use my laptop for many different things like gaming, coding, etc.
I don't think it's that important to have 64-bit applications per se. The advantage of having a 64-bit application is that it can access much more memory. Superscript 1. Perform 64-bit register operations. Squared. Superscript 1. A 64-bit program may be a little faster depending on how it works. If your application is memory hungry, like Photoshop, 3D rendering, etc., then having a 64-bit version will give it access to all the computer's memory. Without that, it will be limited to somewhere around 2 GB. That's on a per application basis, so 2 applications can access a total of 4 GB. Squared. Performing a 64-bit operation on a 64-bit operating system is faster than performing it on a 32-bit operating system. It would take at least 2 32-bit operations to perform the same thing. Stability-wise, there should be no difference between 64-bit and 32-bit applications.
The biggest benefit from using a 64-bit application on a 64-bit OS is that you have full access to all the memory available on the system. With 64-bit memory addresses, the application can access more memory than its 32-bit equivalent. In addition, 64-bit programs will work better than 32-bit ones as they are using the native system architecture. Operations such as memory reads are performed natively, etc. This means that the OS doesn't have to do any extra work translating, packing/unpacking of memory, etc., the commands that the application is using. However, most programs, such as Firefox, Word, Adobe Reader, etc., spend most of their time waiting for user input, so efficiency isn't necessarily a prime concern. Also, most of these applications, at the moment, don't require the extra memory that going to 64-bit would give them access to. Programs such as graphics drivers do have to work efficiently and perhaps have access to higher memory registers, and so need to be 64-bit.
Yes, you can run without problems the 32-bit apps on your 64-bit operating system, but there is another problem of wasting space: the libraries. Basically, an app would load the appropriate library it needs, but the problem is that 64-bit libraries are not compatible with 32-bit ones, and vice versa. Of course, usually the needed libraries are shipped with the application itself, but the core ones, Windows ones, are stored twice, one of them, the 32-bit one, and the other, the 64-bit one. They also occupy more memory on RAM if you have one 32-bit application and one another 64-bit running concurrently. The two apps loaded their own version of library, and so they are using more RAM than they could if they were both using the same library. So, for the sake of saving RAM and hard drive space, try to run and install 64-bit only apps, and install 32-bit ones only if you couldn't find a 64-bit version. Now, more and more apps are shipped in both versions.
The answer is it depends. Some 32-bit applications will not work in 64-bit mode, for example graphics drivers and shell extensions, such as Tortoise SVN. In such a case you need a 64-bit version. For other normal applications, then it depends on what they do. If you happen to have, for example, 16 GB of memory and are running SQL Server with an extremely large database, then having 64-bit version of SQL is very important. If, however, you have 4 GB of memory, with almost 1 GB stolen by the video card, then you may be running low of memory and using 64-bit applications, which may require more memory, may actually slow your system down. Even ignoring memory considerations, you cannot say for certain that a 32-bit application running in 64-bit mode will be faster or slower than the 64-bit equivalent, nor whether the application will be faster or slower than when running on a 32-bit operating system. Personally, if I'm looking for a utility or small application for my machine, I will check that it works with 64-bit operating system, but whether the application is 32-bit or 64-bit is not normally high on my priority list. According to Process Explorer, I currently have 25 64-bit processes and 28 32-bit processes running, ignoring Chrome.
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.